a decorated military colonel, an A-list Hollywood salary, 5,000 acres of prime Wyoming earth under his command. Look at this untouchable American titan on the first of the month. Now, mark the calendar. Let 3 weeks pass, 21 days of ticking time. Suddenly, the bank chains the iron gates shut. The millions evaporate. The decorated officer wanders the cold pavement, broke and homeless. What catastrophic reality wipes out a millionaire's empire and leaves him destitute in just 21 days? The spring of 1938 did not bring a triumphant spectacle. It brought a sprawling, muddy graveyard of shattered ambition. Step onto the deserted fairground. The brightly painted canvas tents, designed to house thousands of cheering spectators, now sag and collapse into the damp earth. The thick manila ropes lie slack in the dirt, abandoned by the crews who erected them. The custom-built train cars, painted with vibrant, boastful lettering just weeks prior, sit silent and cold on the iron tracks. The festive atmosphere has been replaced by a chilling, suffocating silence, broken only by the sharp, metallic snap of padlocks snapping shut. This is not the end of a long, grueling season. This is the catastrophic aftermath of a financial detonation. The grandest traveling exhibition in the world, an operation of unprecedented scale and unimaginable expense, has disintegrated. It did not slowly bleed out over months or years. It suffered a sudden, violent death. 21 days after its glorious, heralded opening, the enterprise is dead. The immediate aftermath of a total bankruptcy during the height of the Great Depression is a brutal, mechanical process. It lacks any trace of human empathy or Hollywood romance. The men who arrive to clean up the wreckage do not carry scripts or cameras. They wear immaculate gray suits and carry wooden clipboards holding federal court orders. They are the creditors, the bankers, and the ruthless liquidators. They swarm the muddy campground like a plague of locusts, systematically stripping the flesh from the bones of the dead show. They do not see dreams or artistic vision. They see only numbers, debts, and recoverable assets. They move with terrifying efficiency. Armed guards stand by as the liquidators inventory every single item on the grounds. The magnificent, trained horses are seized and tagged for immediate auction. The elaborate, custom-tailored costumes, the expensive lighting rigs, the massive wooden bleachers, and the leather saddles are all confiscated. The bank claims ownership of the very dirt under their boots. But the devastation of this 21-day collapse refuses to remain confined to the muddy boundaries of the East Coast Fairground. The legal machinery of debt collection operates with a long, merciless reach. The massive financial hemorrhage of the show cannot be contained, and the infection spreads rapidly across the continent, seeking the personal wealth of the man who signed the contracts. The liquidators turn their cold eyes toward the crown jewel of his empire, Eagle's Nest. Imagine a sprawling, majestic domain in the heart of Wyoming. 5,000 acres of pristine, untouched wilderness. It is not merely a home, it is a fortress of wealth and unparalleled status. It represents the pinnacle of Hollywood success, a physical manifestation of an A-list salary and an untamed ego. The estate features sprawling pastures, towering timber structures, and the kind of luxurious isolation reserved strictly for American royalty. For years, the decorated colonel ruled this massive kingdom without challenge. But a signature on a failed business venture holds more power than any military rank or cinematic legacy. The creditors draft the foreclosure documents. The bank executives authorize the seizure, thousands of miles away from the collapsed tents. Local sheriffs arrive at the borders of Eagle's Nest. They hammer the eviction notices directly into the wooden posts. They string steel chains across the grand entrance and lock the iron gates shut. The 5,000-acre sanctuary is ripped from his hands in an instant. The millions of dollars tied up in the land evaporate. The empire is liquidated. While the bankers divide the physical assets, the horrific human toll of the 21-day tragedy unfolds in the mud of the abandoned camp. An army of performers, recruited from across the nation with promises of a steady wages and grand adventure, find themselves abruptly discarded. The rugged cowboy actors, men who risk their spines and break their bones for the entertainment of the masses, line up outside the paymaster's wagon. They expect the thick envelopes of cash dictated by their signed contracts. They expect the reward for their grueling physical labor. Instead, they face a terrified accountant staring at empty ledgers. The grand payout is a devastating insult. The paymaster reaches into a small metal lockbox and presses a few loose silver coins into their calloused hands, a handful of dimes and quarters, accompanied by a hollow, meaningless expression of gratitude. It is a pathetic, insulting severance. The cowboys stare at the loose change resting in their palms, realizing the brutal truth. Their hard labor funded a millionaire's delusion, and when the illusion shattered, they were left holding the useless dust. They pack their meager belongings and walk away into the cold reality of the Depression, betrayed by the system. Yet, the plight of the cowboys pales in comparison to the shameful tragedy of the camp. The show had imported dozens of Native American performers, bringing entire families directly from their distant reservations to serve as the authentic centerpiece of the grand spectacle. These men, women, and children were promised secure employment, proper housing, and safe transport. Now the show is bankrupt. The millionaire has vanished into closed-door legal meetings, and the funds are gone. The Native American performers are abruptly abandoned in a strange, unforgiving environment, thousands of miles away from their homes. They do not even receive the insulting handful of silver coins. They possess nothing. They are stranded without shelter as the canvas tents are seized. They are stranded without food as the commissary wagons are locked. The profound indignity of their situation is a glaring testament to the sheer recklessness of the operation. The abandonment is so complete and the destitution so profound that local authorities cannot handle the crisis. The news of the stranded families reaches Washington. The situation requires the direct, humiliating intervention of the United States federal government. Bureaucrats from the Bureau of Indian Affairs are dispatched to the muddy fairground. They must allocate emergency government funds to purchase basic rations and secure third-class train tickets. The final, heartbreaking image of the grand show is not a triumphant parade. It is the sight of these proud families clutching their few possessions, standing on a cold concrete train platform. They are treated as helpless wards of the state, forced to rely on government charity simply to return to the reservations, all because an untouchable Hollywood titan played a reckless game with their lives and lost everything in 3 weeks. Look closely at the architect of this unparalleled disaster, the celebrated Colonel, the A-list movie star, the millionaire who once surveyed 5,000 acres of Wyoming from the porch of his private palace. Stand him amidst the ruined canvas, the locked train cars, and the angry, betrayed performers. The timeline is the most terrifying element of the entire narrative. 21 days. In the amount of time it takes for the moon to complete 3/4 of its cycle, a seemingly invincible American empire was reduced to zero. The massive fortune, accumulated through decades of military service and relentless cinematic output, was incinerated. The sprawling real estate was seized by the banks. The reputation was shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. He entered the month as a king holding the world in his palm. He exits the month as a penniless, legally ruined ghost standing on the pavement. The 21-day collapse stands as a brutal, terrifying monument to the fragility of wealth. It proves that no amount of Hollywood fame, no military rank, and no thousands of acres of land can protect a man when the ruthless mathematics of debt finally come to collect. The descent from the pinnacle of high society to the cold, unforgiving reality of the streets does not require years of slow decline. It only requires one catastrophic gamble, one fatal miscalculation, and 21 days of ticking time to wipe a titan off the map. The comfortable classrooms of a Midwestern college offered a safe, predictable path to a soft life. At 18 years old, Tim McCoy looked at that paved road and felt suffocated. He rejected the safety net of formal education. He packed a single canvas bag, turned his back on the civilized comforts of the East, and bought a one-way train ticket straight into the untamed, unforgiving heart of Wyoming. The transition was jarring and brutal. He did not arrive as a wealthy heir looking to purchase a sprawling ranch. He stepped off the loud hissing steam locomotive and planted his boots onto the dusty wooden platform, with nothing in his pockets but raw, unchecked ambition. The turn of the century in Wyoming was not a painted backdrop for tourists. It was a massive, violent expanse of cracked earth, howling winds, and dangerous men. It was a landscape designed to crush weakness and swallow greenhorns alive. McCoy looked at the vast, intimidating horizon and decided to conquer it. He threw himself headfirst into the dirt. He did not seek out gentlemen or scholars for his frontier education. He deliberately sought out the hardened, cynical survivors of the dying Wild West. His chosen teachers were grizzled cattlemen, rugged frontiersmen, and literal ex-outlaws who had traded their lethal six-shooters for branding irons. These were men who settled arguments with their fists and communicated in grunts and spit. They looked at the young, clean-shaven college dropout and subjected him to a merciless, brutal curriculum of physical survival. They handed him a coiled rope and pointed him toward a herd of furious, unbroken mustangs. McCoy learned to break horses not through gentle whispers, but through violent, bone-rattling physical leverage. He absorbed crushing falls, snapped ribs, and tasted the bloody dirt. He learned to anticipate the sudden, lethal kick of a wild animal. He forced himself back into the leather saddle day after day until the beasts submitted to his iron will. The education extended far beyond the corral. The ex-outlaws dragged him into the wilderness. They forced him to navigate blinding, sub-zero blizzards with nothing but a pocket compass and primal instinct. He learned how to start a fire in the freezing rain, how to track stray, panicked cattle across miles of barren scrubland, and how to sleep soundly on the frozen, unyielding ground with his rifle resting directly across his chest. The soft, unblemished skin of a city boy blistered under the scorching sun, bled on the barbed wire, and slowly transformed into thick, impenetrable leather. He forged himself into a genuine cowboy. He was no longer an outsider. He became an apex survivor, molded by the harshest, most demanding landscape in the American West. His mastery of the frontier went deeper than mere physical endurance. He understood that true dominance required supreme intelligence and communication. Wyoming was not empty. It belonged to the ancient tribes. McCoy did not fear the Native Americans. He respected their survival skills and their ancient culture. He immersed himself in their world. He spent grueling months sitting in the dirt with the elders of the Arapaho and Shoshone tribes. He painstakingly learned the intricate, silent vocabulary of Native American Sign Language. He mastered the complex hand gestures, becoming a fluent, trusted translator. This rare, specialized skill elevated him above the common ranch hand. It proved his dedication to the reality of the West. He could negotiate treaties, settle violent disputes, and command respect across cultural lines without speaking a single audible word. He possessed a terrifying, silent intelligence. Then, the global order fractured. The First World War ignited across the Atlantic Ocean, dragging civilized nations into a mechanized slaughterhouse. McCoy did not hide behind his civilian status or his vital ranching duties. He answered the call with unflinching resolve. He traded the sprawling, open plains of Wyoming for the strict, rigid discipline of the United States Army. He enlisted and brought the hardened toughness of the frontier directly into the military ranks. The Army recognized a natural apex predator within their formations. He possessed a terrifying calm under pressure, a crucial psychological trait honed by years of managing panicked cattle herds during violent thunderstorms. He transitioned seamlessly from a rugged cowboy to a lethal cavalry officer. He mastered advanced military tactics, understood the grim mathematics of logistics, and led his men with unquestioned authority. He thrived in the strict hierarchy, his spine stiffened by ironclad discipline. His exceptional service during the global conflict propelled him upward at a staggering velocity. He returned to the United States not as a simple soldier, but as a seasoned, battle-hardened commander. His rise through the political and military landscape of his adopted state was meteoric and unprecedented. He dominated every room he entered. The governor of Wyoming, recognizing this unparalleled display of leadership and competence, handed him the ultimate key to power. At the impossibly young age of 28, Tim McCoy was appointed as the Adjutant General of Wyoming. He stood at attention and allowed the silver star of a brigadier general to be pinned to the collar of his crisp uniform. It was a monumental, historic achievement. He became one of the youngest men of the history of the United States Armed Forces to hold that immense, crushing rank. He was 28 years old, and he held command over the entire National Guard of the state. Thousands of armed, trained soldiers answered directly to his specific orders. He did not achieve this rank through inherited wealth, political nepotism, or quiet bureaucratic maneuvering. He seized the command through undeniable physical presence, raw intelligence, and a reputation forged in the mud, blood, and dust of his own labor. He carried the literal weight of state security on his broad shoulders. He was a self-made titan, a man who built an untouchable kingdom on his own merit. This supreme, unshakable confidence manifested in a distinct, unforgettable visual signature. The American frontier breeds a need for practicality, but McCoy elevated that basic utility into a lethal, intimidating art form. He despised the flamboyant, ridiculous outfits that amateur riders wore. He rejected the bright colors, the absurd leather fringe, and the shiny, useless silver conchos. He crafted a personal aesthetic of pure, terrifying shadow. He dressed exclusively, from head to toe, in pitch black. He wore a wide-brimmed black Stetson pulled dangerously low over his piercing, icy blue eyes. He wore a crisp, impeccably tailored black shirt that fit his muscular frame like armor. He wore immaculate black trousers tucked tightly into polished, heavy black leather boots. He looked like an executioner, a hanging judge, and a battlefield general rolled into one terrifying silhouette. Black does not show the dirt of the trail. Black absorbs the blinding light of the sun. Black projects unquestioned authority. When a 28-year-old brigadier general dressed entirely in dark shadow walks into a crowded room, the ambient noise dies. The oxygen leaves the space. Grown men instinctively stand at attention and hold their breath. He was the undeniable embodiment of the alpha male. He was a flesh-and-blood monument of pure American grit. He projected an aura of a man impervious to weakness, immune to failure, and utterly incapable of defeat. The commanding presence of the young, black-clad general did not stay confined to the high plains. The brutal authenticity he forged in the dirt caught the desperate eye of a nascent entertainment industry. By 1923, the silent film studios in Los Angeles hungered for a massive, unprecedented spectacle. They greenlit an epic frontier production titled The Covered Wagon. The ambitious directors quickly realized a critical flaw in their grand design. They possessed heavy wooden cameras, wealthy investors, and eager actors, but they knew nothing about the harsh realities of the actual West. They needed a logistical master. They needed a technical advisor capable of orchestrating a massive physical migration on camera. More critically, they required a man who could bridge a massive cultural divide. The script demanded hundreds of authentic Native American background actors, not painted Hollywood extras. The studio executives sent an urgent wire to Tim McCoy. He accepted the monumental task. He did not travel to the sun-baked California sets alone. Utilizing the deep, unshakable trust he had cultivated for years, he convinced hundreds of Native American men, women, and children to leave their reservations and travel to the chaotic film sets. This was an unparalleled logistical feat. McCoy single-handedly managed their transportation, secured their daily rations, ensured their proper housing, and fought the studio accountants to guarantee their fair compensation. He stood as the unbreakable barrier between the proud tribes and the exploitative Hollywood machinery. The studio recognized the necessity of his command. They rewarded his unique expertise with a staggering financial contract. They paid the Wyoming Cowboy $1,000 every single week. In the early 1920s, a skilled American tradesman labored for 12 grueling months to earn a fraction of that amount. McCoy held a literal king's ransom in his calloused hands every Friday afternoon. the camera lens possesses a primal instinct for recognizing raw power. The ruthless studio executives watch the tall, intimidating military officer direct the massive crowds on set. They observed his piercing blue eyes, his rigid, uncompromising posture, and his undeniable magnetic command over the frame. They pulled him out from behind the scenes and pushed him directly into the blinding glare of the Klieg lights. Metro Goldwyn Mayer and Columbia Pictures drafted massive, exclusive contracts. Tim McCoy transformed from a technical consultant into a global A-list superstar overnight. He headlined an endless stream of cinematic features, dominating the global box office and drawing millions of eager, paying fans into dark, crowded theaters. The studio checks multiplied, transforming the cowboy into a millionaire. However, McCoy despised the soft, artificial reality of Beverly Hills. He did not waste his massive fortune on fragile Mediterranean mansions, imported sports cars, or extravagant coastal yachts. He funneled the Hollywood millions straight back into the harsh, unforgiving dirt of his beloved frontier. He purchased massive tracts of land and leased thousands of adjoining acres with an insatiable, conquering appetite. He controlled a staggering 5,000 acres of pristine, untouched Wyoming territory. He named this sprawling domain Eagle's Nest. Eagle's Nest was not a simple gentleman's ranch. It was a fortified, self-sustaining kingdom. The sheer scale of the property defied imagination. Deep, rushing rivers cut through his private valleys. Timbered lodges, built from felled trees, stood defiant against the bitter mountain winds. Thousands of head of prime cattle bearing his personal brand roamed across the endless pastures, kicking up dust clouds visible for miles. He employed a private army of hardened ranch hands to manage the daily operation. He rode his land on a massive stallion, surveying an empire that stretched to the horizon. He lived the uncompromising life of a feudal baron, reigning over a harsh kingdom carved out of the wilderness, funded entirely by the relentless engine of his silver screen fantasies. Yet the immense suffocating wealth and the blinding global Hollywood fame never corrupted his core morality. The true measure of a king lies precisely in how he wields his power regarding the vulnerable. In an era where American popular culture and government policy routinely demonized, mocked, and marginalized Native Americans, McCoy stood as an iron shield defending their ancient honor. His connection to the indigenous tribes was not a cheap manufactured publicity stunt designed to sell movie tickets. It was a profound, sacred bond forged years earlier in the freezing dust and the smoke of reservation campfires. He possessed flawless fluency in indigenous sign language. He did not speak down to the tribal leaders from a position of arrogant white authority. He communicated with them as respected equals. His hands moved with precise, practiced grace, translating complex thoughts and deep emotions without uttering a single audible syllable. The tribes recognized the genuine, uncorrupted purity of his intentions. They did not see a greedy Hollywood actor looking for a prop. They saw a bleeding brother of the plains. The tribal elders and the powerful spiritual shamans brought him deep into their sacred guarded circles. They offered him spiritual protection and bestowed upon him ceremonial honors rarely granted to an outsider. The Arapaho tribe initiated him through ancient rites and gave him the sacred name High Eagle. The Shoshone embraced his presence and named him Bani-E-Natcha. These were not empty theatrical nicknames. They were heavy titles of profound respect, cementing a literal blood brotherhood that transcended race, politics, and culture. McCoy weaponized his massive Hollywood influence to protect his brothers. The silent era and early talkies relied on violent, racist tropes. When studio directors handed him scripts featuring stereotypical, bloodthirsty Native American villains slated for slaughter, McCoy threw the pages onto the dirt floor. He refused to participate in the cinematic humiliation of his friends. He utilized his box office leverage to force the powerful studio writers to alter the narratives. He demanded scripts that portrayed the indigenous tribes with complex humanity, stoic dignity, and rigorous historical accuracy. On the silver screen, the black-clad general did not hunt the native warriors. He rode alongside them. He communicated with them using authentic sign language directly on camera, showcasing their sophisticated, ancient culture to millions of ignorant, prejudiced theater-goers across the globe. He instituted an unbreakable rule on his sets. He never fired a prop gun at a Native American actor. He elevated their status within the ruthless entertainment industry, demanding the directors and producers treat them with the exact reverence he held in his own heart. Look closely at the man standing at the summit of the 1930s. He possessed a bank account overflowing with millions of dollars in studio capital. He commanded a 5,000-acre private fortress guarded by the Wyoming mountains. He held the deep, spiritual loyalty of the ancient tribes and the adoration of the American public. He was a millionaire, a general, a superstar, and a righteous, unyielding defender of the marginalized. He built an empire of staggering material wealth and unbreakable moral fortitude. He stood upon a massive mountain of his own making, projecting an aura of total invincibility, oblivious to the catastrophic 21-day avalanche waiting to bury him alive. The foundation of any catastrophic downfall is rarely built on failure. It is almost always constructed from a series of blinding, uninterrupted successes. For Tim McCoy, the initial poison did not come in a glass, but in the deafening roar of a live audience. By the mid-1930s, the cinematic landscape began a slow, inevitable shift. The novelty of the early westerns faded, replaced by different genres and new, younger stars. However, a true showman does not simply retire to his sprawling Wyoming ranch and wait for obscurity. He pivots. Between 1935 and 1938, McCoy secured a lucrative contract with the legendary Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. He brought his imposing, black-clad persona, his authentic writing skills, and his deep connection with Native American culture out of the dark movie theaters and directly into the brightly lit circus tents. The live touring circuit provided a visceral, addictive energy that the sterile Hollywood sound stages could never replicate. He stood in the center ring, a towering physical monument to the American West, commanding the attention of tens of thousands of screaming fans every single night. The tour was an unprecedented financial triumph. The circus executives handed him exorbitant weekly checks, further inflating an already massive personal fortune. But the money was secondary to the psychological impact. The relentless nightly adulation from massive crowds acts as a potent, dangerous narcotic. It feeds the ego, warping a man's perception of his own limitations. McCoy looked out at the sea of cheering faces, and made a fatal miscalculation. He attributed the success of the circus entirely to his own personal gravity. He believed the crowds were not there for the acrobats, the elephants, or the legendary Ringling Brand. He convinced himself they were buying tickets solely to witness the general. This unchecked arrogance birthed a dangerous, consuming vision. The American definition of success dictates that a man must constantly expand. Maintaining the status quo is viewed as stagnation. True titans must build something larger, grander, and more expensive than their predecessors. McCoy looked at the profitable, tightly organized machinery of the Ringling Brothers Circus and decided it was too small to contain his ambition. He resented sharing the spotlight and the revenue. He possessed the millions in the bank, the unparalleled star power, and the conviction that his vision could conquer the globe. He made the conscious, deliberate decision to sever his ties with the established touring company. He would not just headline a show. He would own the entire universe. The blueprints for this new enterprise were not merely ambitious, they bordered on clinical madness. He drafted plans for a sprawling, traveling spectacle officially titled Colonel Tim McCoy's Real Wild West and Rough Riders of the World. The very name of the production was a direct, aggressive challenge to the ghosts of the past. For decades, the gold standard of live Western entertainment belonged to the legendary Buffalo Bill Cody. Buffalo Bill's iconic tours had defined the genre in the late 19th century. McCoy did not just want to match Buffalo Bill. He intended to obliterate his memory. The scale of McCoy's proposed show was so incredibly vast, so bloated, that historians later noted you could physically fit the entirety of Buffalo Bill's legendary operation into just one half of McCoy's sprawling campground. He initiated an unprecedented spending spree that terrified his financial advisors. He did not seek out cautious investors or secure protective corporate backing. Driven by blinding hubris, he chose to bankroll the entire operation using his own personal fortune. He liquidated massive cash reserves. He leveraged the sprawling 5,000 acres of Eagle's Nest, using his beloved sanctuary as collateral to secure high-interest loans from ruthless Eastern banks. He bet his entire life's work, every dime he had earned from the trenches of Europe to the sound stages of Hollywood, on a single, massive roll of the dice. The logistics of assembling the show required a staggering outlay of capital. He purchased a private fleet of custom-built, heavy steel train cars to transport the operation across the country. These were not standard freight cars. They were lavishly painted, reinforced rolling fortresses designed to house hundreds of people and tons of equipment. He ordered the construction of a custom-designed canvas tent, a temporary cathedral capable of seating over 10,000 spectators simultaneously. The sheer yardage of the canvas and the miles of heavy manila rope required to secure it cost a small fortune. He then began recruiting the personnel, sparing no expense. He did not hire cheap local talent. He dispatched agents across the globe to secure the best performers money could buy. He hired elite troops of rough-riding Cossacks from the steppes of Eastern Europe. He imported skilled, daring horsemen from the sprawling pampas of Argentina. He recruited heavily from the ranks of the finest American rodeo champions, offering them salaries that dwarfed their standard earnings. True to his core principles, he brought entire families of Native American performers from the reservations, ensuring they had proper accommodations within the traveling city. The daily operational costs were astronomical. The show required a dedicated army of hundreds of manual laborers just to erect and dismantle the massive tents in a matter of hours. They required mobile kitchens to feed the hundreds of performers and crew members 3 times a day. They required a small fortune in specialized feed and veterinary care for the hundreds of elite horses traveling in the custom train cars. The financial burn rate of the operation was terrifying. A roaring furnace consuming thousands of dollars every single day before a ticket was even sold to the public. McCoy stood in the center of the chaotic staging area, surrounded by the deafening noise of construction and the logistical nightmare of his own creation. He had successfully assembled the largest, most expensive traveling exhibition the world had ever seen. He possessed unshakable confidence in the final product. He believed the American public would line up around the block, emptying their wallets to witness his grand vision. He had bet the farm, the millions in the bank, the 5,000 acres in Wyoming, and his professional legacy on this sprawling beast. The trap was meticulously set. He had built a magnificent, expensive vehicle, climbed into the driver's seat, and slammed his foot on the accelerator, ignoring the fact that he was driving it directly toward an unforgiving brick wall. The twisted metal and rotting canvas left in the mud demand a forensic financial autopsy. We possess the corpse of the greatest live entertainment venture in American history. Now, we must extract the exact cause of death. How does a seasoned military tactician, a man trained to calculate risk and manage massive logistical supply lines, march his entire personal fortune directly off a cliff? The destruction of Tim McCoy was not a random accident of fate. It was a perfect, lethal collision of 3 unstoppable forces. We must open the investigative file and examine the precise mechanics of a total collapse. The first lethal factor originated within the confines of his own skull. It is the insidious, creeping disease of megalomania. Decades of unbroken, towering success create a dangerous neurological rot within the human mind. McCoy survived the brutal Wyoming winters as a teenager. He commanded cavalry units during global warfare. He conquered the ruthless studio system of Hollywood, dictating terms to powerful executives. He packed massive circus tents from coast to coast. When a man spends his entire adult life kicking down every locked door he encounters, he eventually forgets how to use a key. He assumes he possesses the supernatural ability to simply walk through solid brick walls. The immense wealth generated by Eagle's Nest and his film contracts insulated him from the harsh, mathematical realities of business. He surrounded himself with Hollywood sycophants, yes men, and paid enablers who eagerly drank his top-shelf whiskey, but refused to challenge his dangerous financial projections. He confused his undeniable personal popularity with infinite market demand. He reviewed the staggering daily operating costs of his new show. He looked at the unyielding payroll for hundreds of specialized international performers. He saw the tons of expensive daily feed required for the custom horses. He ignored the exorbitant fuel costs for a private train fleet. He waved the ledgers away with the arrogant flick of a wrist. He firmly believed the sheer magnetic gravity of his name on the marquee would magically manifest the necessary cash. He lacked a pessimistic accountant willing to tell a general no. His unchecked ego completely blinded him to the basic, inescapable, and unforgiving laws of cash flow. He built a machine that required a king's ransom just to idle, assuming the world would gladly pay to watch it run. The second force acted as a brutal macroeconomic guillotine. The timing of the grand launch stands as a historical masterclass in catastrophic bad luck. McCoy rolled his custom-painted train cars out of the staging yards in the early spring of 1938. He drove his fragile, cash-hungry empire directly into the gaping jaws of the Great Depression. The American economy in 1938 was not merely struggling. It was experiencing a brutal secondary collapse known to historians as the Roosevelt Recession. The brief, fragile economic recovery of the mid-30s had shattered. National unemployment skyrocketed back to terrifying double-digit levels. Industrial production plummeted. Factories locked their heavy iron gates, and the stock market bled out on the trading floor. Look closely at the visceral reality of the American working class during this specific window of time. Desperate men in threadbare suits stood in lines wrapping around city blocks, enduring the freezing rain just to receive a bowl of watery, tasteless soup and a heel of stale bread. Families lost their multi-generational farms to the choking dust storms and the ruthless regional banks. In this grim landscape of crushing poverty, live entertainment is not a priority. It is an impossible, insulting luxury. McCoy demanded these broken families pay a premium ticket price to sit under his massive canvas tent. He fundamentally misunderstood the financial pulse of the nation. Starving, terrified men do not buy expensive tickets to watch a wealthy Hollywood cowboy perform a trick riding. They hoard their few remaining copper pennies for flour, coal, and basic survival. 1938 stands historically as the darkest, deadliest year for the American circus industry. Dozens of established veteran touring shows filed for immediate bankruptcy, bleeding out on the dusty back roads of the country. McCoy launched the most expensive, bloated live show in human history during the exact moment the American public possessed the least amount of disposable income in modern history. It was financial suicide executed by historical miscalculation. He asked men who could not afford shoes for their children to fund his lavish frontier fantasy. The third and final nail driven into the coffin was a profound, permanent shift in cultural consumption. McCoy built a breathe-in monument to the 19th century and stubbornly tried to sell it to a 20th century audience. The era of the live traveling Wild West show, pioneered decades earlier by the legendary Buffalo Bill Cody, was effectively dead. It was a prehistoric dinosaur sinking rapidly into the technological tar pits. Modern innovation had permanently altered the entertainment landscape. Consider the basic consumer choice. Why would an American family spend a hard-earned dollar, endure the oppressive summer heat, fight unruly crowds, and sit on hard, splintering wooden bleachers smelling of heavy horse manure and a stagnant dust? They possessed a far superior, significantly cheaper alternative right down the street. For a single silver dime, they could walk through the brass doors of a local movie palace. They could sit in plush, comfortable velvet seats inside an air-conditioned, beautifully decorated theater. They could watch Tim McCoy, projected 10 feet tall onto a massive, pristine silver screen with synchronized crystal-clear audio. The powerful film industry had successfully perfected the mass production and distribution of the Western fantasy. Hollywood delivered the rugged cowboys, the fierce Native American warriors, and the dramatic, smoking gunfights, with perfect studio lighting, dramatic musical scores, and zero logistical risk to the consumer. The public taste had evolved past the dirt ring. They demanded the polished, controlled cinematic illusion. They no longer wanted the dirty, unpredictable, wildly expensive reality of a live arena. The brigadier general did not realize he was selling obsolete goods to a starving population. He stood at the center of his empty canvas tent, a decorated commander shouting orders to a ghost army. The invisible, creeping disease of his own ego blinded him to the structural danger of his massive debt. The crushing, unrelenting weight of the Great Depression actively starved his potential audience of the cash required to save him. The mechanical march of cinematic technology rendered his live business model obsolete before the first ticket was even punched. These three massive, unstoppable historical forces converged in the muddy spring of 1938. They struck the magnificent show with the sudden, destructive force of a runaway freight train. The impact shattered the grand illusion, liquidated the millions in the bank, erased the 5,000 acres of Wyoming paradise, and left a towering Hollywood titan standing utterly defenseless in the ruin of his own colossal ignorance. The public demands a spectacle, especially when a towering titan falls. When the dust settled over the ruined canvas of his colossal circus, the national press descended. They wanted tears. They wanted a shattered, broken idol begging the public for mercy and financial salvation. Tim McCoy gave them a stone wall. He stood before the flashing cameras, his spine perfectly rigid, projecting the unyielding, dominant posture of a commanding officer. He casually admitted to the eager reporters that he had simply lost a bundle, minimizing the evaporation of millions of dollars into a minor, gentlemanly inconvenience. He stared directly into the camera lenses and declared, with terrifying stoicism, that he harbored zero regrets regarding his massive gamble. It was a masterful, Oscar-worthy performance. He played the fearless, untouchable cowboy one last time for the public record. But a proud posture cannot pacify angry, ruthless creditors, and stoicism cannot buy a hot meal or pay the rent. Behind the closed, locked doors of cheap, temporary rooms, the armor cracked. The invincible millionaire was dead. A middle-aged man, buried alive under a mountain of insurmountable debt, took his place. He swallowed the bitter ash of his shattered pride, packed his remaining black suits, and boarded a commercial train heading west. He was returning to Los Angeles. The Hollywood ecosystem operates on a ruthless, unforgiving caste system. It is a predatory, superficial hierarchy where current status and bankable momentum are the only recognized currencies. Years earlier, McCoy arrived in this city as a conquering king. Studio executives, from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, rolled out plush red carpets, offered him private trailers, and handed him lucrative contracts. Now, he returned as radioactive material. In the cold mathematics of the film industry, a catastrophic financial failure is highly contagious. The major studios, the glittering empires that built their foundational wealth on his early Western epics, locked their iron gates. They refused to return his frantic phone calls. The A-list executives, Men who used to drink his expensive whiskey at lavish parties suddenly looked the other way when he walked down the boulevard. He was firmly in his middle age. He possessed no Wyoming estate to retreat to. He possessed no hidden safety net and no secret cash reserves. He was forced to start completely over. He was not starting from zero. He was navigating from a crushing, suffocating negative deficit in an industry that despised and discarded aging losers. The descent from the pinnacle of the Hollywood A-list is a steep, terrifying drop into a cinematic purgatory known historically as Poverty Row. McCoy found himself knocking on the splintered wooden doors of microscopic, severely underfunded production companies. He signed desperate, low-paying contracts with studios that most major actors considered a terminal career disease. Monogram Pictures, Victory Pictures, and the Producers Releasing Corporation, commonly referred to as PRC. These were not the glamorous, well-oiled dream factories of his triumphant youth. These were desperate, grinding sweatshops operating on the dirty fringes of the entertainment industry. The physical contrast between his past and his present was a daily, agonizing humiliation. He traded sprawling, meticulously constructed studio backlots for cheap, barren patches of rented, sun-baked dirt. He traded massive, dedicated crews and top-tier visionary directors for frantic, exhausted cameramen shooting with cheap, expired film stock. There were no private dressing rooms, no catered lunches, and no highly paid stunt doubles to take the bone-rattling falls. The production schedules on Poverty Row were brutal. Mechanical meat grinders designed solely for volume. The cheap directors did not care about artistic integrity, historical accuracy, or the nuanced portrayal of Native American culture that McCoy once fought so fiercely to protect on the MGM lots. They only cared about speed and slashing the budget. They churned out cheap, formulaic B-grade movies in a matter of frantic days, shooting dozens of rapid setups before the sun went down. McCoy, a man who once commanded absolute authority over his own sprawling empire, now took barked, disrespectful orders from frantic, no-name directors half his age. He was forced to wear his iconic black outfits and repeat the same tired, predictable dialogue in hastily written, abysmal scripts. He had to mount cheap, rented horses and ride through the dusty California canyons hour after hour. His aging, aching joints absorbed the punishing impact of the cheap leather saddles. He performed these repetitive, degrading physical tasks for pennies. He accepted meager, insulting day rates, squeezing out tiny, agonizing droplets of cash to appease the massive swarm of creditors constantly circling his life and garnishing his pathetic wages. Every single frame of film shot for PRC or Victory was a heavy, suffocating reminder of his catastrophic failure. Imagine the searing, silent, psychological torture of his daily reality. He stood under the glaring studio lights, reciting terrible dialogue to untalented co-stars, while his mind inevitably drifted back to the majestic 5,000-acre expanse of Eagle's Nest. He remembered the deep, rushing rivers of his lost Wyoming paradise. He remembered the timbered lodges and the thousands of cattle bearing his personal brand. He remembered the sacred respect of the tribal elders and the staggering wealth that once flowed effortlessly through his calloused hands. Now, he was reduced to a middle-aged, exhausted caricature of his former self, performing cheap parlor tricks to keep the lights on. The acute agony of working menial jobs in your twilight years, especially when you previously owned the world, is a unique, soul-crushing poison. It systematically strips away the foundational dignity of a man's life. When a young man struggles in the dirt, he possesses the heavy armor of hope. He can dream of a brighter, wealthier future on the horizon. When a former millionaire in his 50s is forced to beg for bit parts in forgotten B-movies, the protective armor is gone. The future offers no grand redemption narrative. It offers only an endless, grueling marathon of sheer, desperate survival. McCoy gritted his teeth, locking his legendary pride behind a fortress of silence. He did not complain to the overworked crews. He did not lash out at the disrespectful directors. He arrived on the dusty sets on time, hit his designated marks in the dirt, and performed his assigned duties with the cold, mechanical precision of a seasoned soldier carrying out a grim suicide mission. He watched younger, arrogant actors, men who had never broken a real Mustang or survived a winter blizzard, command the respect and the salaries he once owned. He stood in the dark shadows of the very industry he helped construct from the ground up. He cashed his tiny, humiliating weekly checks at local banks, watching the tellers recognize his famous aging face while processing his meager deposits. Every dollar he earned was instantly swallowed by the massive black hole of his colossal circus debt. He lived in modest, cramped apartments, a terrifying, claustrophobic contrast to the sprawling palaces he once occupied. The cheap plaster walls closed in on him, physical boundaries mocking the boundless, open horizons he once controlled. The Hollywood elite threw lavish, deafening parties in the Hollywood Hills, celebrating new stars and massive box office returns. McCoy was no longer invited. He was a ghost haunting the lowest rungs of the ladder. He became a cautionary tale, whispered in studio executive boardrooms about the extreme dangers of unchecked hubris. He survived the lethal elements of the wild frontier and broke the most vicious animals the West had to offer. But surviving the slow, grinding daily humiliation of Poverty Row required a completely different, infinitely darker type of endurance. He was a king condemned to serve as a tired jester in his own ruined court, swallowing his blood and his pride just to secure another cheap, meaningless role before the cameras stopped rolling forever. A man forged in the freezing Wyoming dirt does not simply surrender to the shadows of a cheap Hollywood backlot. The grinding humiliation of Poverty Row could have easily served as the final, pathetic chapter of a shattered life. Many fallen stars drank themselves into an early grave, unable to cope with the glaring disparity between their glorious past and their bleak present. Tim McCoy possessed a different biological makeup. He operated under a rigid, uncompromising psychological doctrine. His personal philosophy was devastatingly simple and profoundly effective. He stated that when a chapter concludes, no matter how catastrophic the ending, a man must draw the curtain and never look back. He refused to let the ghost of his colossal financial ruin dictate his remaining decades. In 1942, he actively sought a new battlefield. He leveraged his military background and his enduring public recognition to run for a seat in the United States Senate representing Wyoming. He campaigned with his signature rigid posture and booming voice. The political establishment, however, rejected the aging cowboy. He lost the election. For a normal man, this secondary, highly public failure would deliver the fatal psychological blow. For McCoy, it was simply a signal to pivot the attack. The globe was consumed by the fires of the Second World War. Millions of young, terrified men were shipping out to face the mechanized slaughter in Europe and the Pacific. McCoy was 52 years old. He was well past the age of mandatory conscription. He held every legal and moral right to sit out the conflict in safety. Instead, he marched directly into the recruiting office and demanded to serve his country once again. He traded his fading Hollywood costumes for the crisp, olive-drab uniform of the United States military. The Army, recognizing his immense logistical experience and unshakable leadership, deployed him to the European theater. He served with absolute distinction, proving that his core identity was never tied to a bank account or a sprawling ranch. He was, fundamentally, a soldier. The war provided a brutal, necessary crucible. It burned away the lingering shame of the circus bankruptcy and re-established his profound sense of purpose. When the global conflict finally ended, McCoy returned to an American landscape drastically altered by a massive technological revolution. The silver screen was no longer the undisputed king of entertainment. The golden age of television had arrived, placing a flickering, glowing box directly into millions of American living rooms. This new, uncharted medium terrified the aging, silent film stars. They viewed television as a cheap, degrading threat. McCoy, utilizing the exact same fearless instincts that drove him into the Wyoming wilderness at 18, saw an unprecedented opportunity for complete resurrection. He did not try to reclaim his status as an untouchable cinematic action hero. He adapted to his age and his profound wisdom. During the 1950s, he launched The Tim McCoy Show, a television program specifically designed for children. He sat before the live television cameras, stripped of the artificial Hollywood glamour. He spoke directly to the youth of America, utilizing his fluency in Native American Sign Language. He taught them about the authentic history of the frontier, sharing the deep, sacred cultural lessons he learned from the tribal elders decades earlier. The show was an undisputed triumph. It resonated perfectly with a generation hungry for genuine heroes. The television industry recognized his masterful transition and awarded him a prestigious Emmy. The man who lost millions in 3 weeks had successfully clawed his way back to the top of a brand new entertainment empire. This professional rebirth was miraculously mirrored by a profound personal salvation. The universe often rewards resilience with unexpected grace. During this period of television triumph, he crossed paths with Inga Arvad. She was not a superficial Hollywood socialite. She was a brilliant, stunningly beautiful, and highly accomplished international journalist. She possessed a sharp intellect that perfectly matched his own. They formed an immediate, unbreakable bond. He finally discovered the genuine, enduring love that had eluded him during his chaotic, wealthy youth. Look at the final portrait of the general. He did not need 5,000 acres of Wyoming real estate to prove his worth. He did not need millions of dollars locked in a bank vault or the fleeting applause of a circus crowd. He rebuilt his entire universe from absolute zero. He conquered a devastating bankruptcy, survived a second global war, mastered a revolutionary new technology, and found a profound, lasting romance in his twilight years. The fall of Tim McCoy was a terrifying 21-day plunge into absolute darkness, but his magnificent, unyielding resurrection stands as a supreme, immortal testament to the invincible nature of the human spirit. Tim McCoy possesses a shining brass star permanently cemented into the terrazzo of the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But the true enduring measure of his epic, turbulent existence is not found on that crowded, superficial boulevard. It is found in the smoking ashes of his greatest financial disaster. Society is conditioned to measure the success of an American life by the size of the real estate, the volume of cash locked in the bank vault, and the arrogant scale of the ambition. McCoy achieved the pinnacle of those metrics. He built a sprawling, untouchable empire of solid land and celluloid fantasy. Yet the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of his downfall proved a terrifying reality. Millions of dollars, custom-built trains, and thousands of acres of prime Wyoming earth can vaporize into thin air in exactly 21 days. Supreme material wealth is nothing but a fragile, fleeting illusion. When that magnificent illusion violently shattered, it did not destroy the man standing underneath the rubble. That survival is his actual, immortal legacy. He embodied the ultimate, uncompromising archetype of the American gentleman. He was a titan who dared to gamble the entire universe on a single, grandiose vision, absorbed a catastrophic, world-ending defeat, and refused to let the failure define his grave. The rigid dignity of a decorated military general, the iron resilience of a battle-tested frontline soldier, and the profound, sacred respect he extended to the marginalized Native American tribes. These are the rare, indestructible currencies that survived the ruthless bankruptcy courts. The superficial title of Hollywood millionaire was rapidly stripped away by the banks, but the sacred, blood-bound name of High Eagle remained untouchable. He lived out his final, quiet decades not in bitter, toxic resentment over his lost fortunes, but in genuine, hard-earned peace, alongside the woman he truly loved. He stands as a towering, historical monument to the power of human redemption. He definitively proved that ultimate wealth is not the absence of failure. It is the raw, unyielding ability to close the darkest chapter of your life, walk away from the absolute wreckage, and build a completely new world from the dirt up. The applause faded long ago, leaving behind only unpaid debts and shattered lives. What are your thoughts on the harsh lives behind the fame? Leave a comment below. If you like this video, hit subscribe to join us behind the scenes of Hidden Legends. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.